Everyone here in the space and on Zoom, and I just want to confirm the audio can wave your hand if you can hear us okay on the Zoom, just to make sure that that's okay. Great, thank you. Let's begin with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Holy One, on this beautiful day in this beautiful city, as we gather in and connected to this beautiful cathedral campus, we know it is with the gift of life that you give us, the gift of the church that you invite us into, the gift of community that you call us into being. With that premise and that identity and that conviction, may we be about our work tonight of conversing and reporting and listening to one another as we take stock of the resources given us as stewards for a time, building an inspiration off of those who have gone before and striving faithfully to pave the way for generations to come who might claim this place their spiritual home as well. May this be a time of holy listening to one another, knowing that you call us into the holy work of vocation together this night and always. Amen. Well, again, welcome, and we're glad that you're here and joined in this. We will give you a little bit of, if you'll go on to the next slide there, please, sir. We want to say thanks to Chris Brown for making the audiovisual possibilities come to fruition for us. We want to say just a few things by way of setup. This group has come together and been working faithfully for 18 months, have reported out to the vestry. You're going to hear a bit more detail about that. And the vestry has charged us with reporting to the parish, which is what we're doing tonight. And we want to give a bit of time where committee members are going to give an overview of the process, content of the conclusions and recommendations that we've made, how the vestry has responded to that, and given further charge coming out of it, including tonight's report and meeting, and then also discuss and dream about future possibilities of the St. Nicholas and the Cathedral campus more generally, knowing that those are really kind of connected but distinct enterprises, the St. Nicholas property specifically and the Cathedral campus more generally. We'll have plenty of time in the second half of the evening for questions and answers and really just conversation. But I want to begin by saying, as the dean of the cathedral, now in my 10th year, just what a remarkable, faithful process this has been and continues to be. I don't think that there's anything that has put a final period on everything, but rather that we've come to a place where we feel like our charge has been fulfilled, and there's work yet to be done, which you'll hear about. But in all of it, I'm just so gratified by the work of the committee and many, many others who have been supporters and advisors along the way. So with that, I want to call on, in just a moment, our chair of the committee, John Herster, who, of course, is no stranger to all of us. But I just have to say, from a personal standpoint, John and I have forged this friendship and collegial partnership in which he, as chancellor for many of my first years here and as chair of the co-chair with his wife Carol of the building campaign a few years ago, and now as the chair of this committee, has such a long view perspective and brings so much wisdom into the mix. And I just trust his leadership implicitly and am grateful for him. So will you greet John Herster with appreciation that I share as his role as committee chair? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Steve. I want to start by commending our committee. So if you could put up the next slide. We obviously had a large committee and the people who were on it had a wide range of experience and expertise and perspectives and viewpoints. We worked well together and ultimately I'm pleased that we reached a strong consensus as a committee in support of our final report. So now one thing I would say about our committee's deliberations, we began each of our meetings. So we had about 18 meetings over the course of the last 18 months. We began each committee meeting with the land acknowledgement. And because of the real property focus of our deliberations, it was meaningful to be starting with that acknowledgement. And then we ended each of our meetings by addressing just in an informal way whether we had taken into consideration or affected in some way the mutual ministry goals in the course of that meeting. And I would say in a unarticulated way, doing that every meeting actually influenced our final report. I don't know that we would have come out with a different report, but I think it was meaningful to be going through that aspect during each of our meetings. So just as a very quick recap, St. Nicholas was purchased in 2003 from Cornish. It had been the Cornish campus, and before that was the St. Nicholas school campus. So anyway, we purchased it in 2003 with the goal that when it was financially possible, we would convert the building into a parish life and ministry center. So that was the goal. As I mentioned, we said we were going to do that when it was financially feasible to do so. And we haven't reached that point of financial feasibility yet, but we, beginning in 2003, have leased the building to two schools. Until recently, Brightwater was one, and then the Gage Academy of Fine Arts is the other. And we also have made use ourselves of the mezzanine for classroom and choir school use. And then we've also used Skinner Auditorium. The St. Nicholas building, for those of you who may have walked through it, is an extraordinary building, and it offers extraordinary opportunities and extraordinary challenges. And just focusing on the challenge side, it's an old building with a lot of repair and maintenance requirements, plus a roof that needs to be replaced and is going to cost over $1 million to replace. And ultimately, seismic challenges related to earthquake protection of the building that will probably cost over $4 million to address. So on the challenge side, there are some significant challenges with the building. And this led the vestry back in a few years ago to raise the question whether it might make more sense to sell the St. Nicholas property and use the proceeds to place a parish life center elsewhere on the campus, and to also generate funds that could be used for mission-related purposes. And the vestry engaged Meriwether advisors to consider this, and they came forward with a report that said the highest and best economic value for St. Nicholas would be to convert that property into market rate condominiums and townhomes. And so our committee was brought into being to help evaluate that idea, to both test it in the marketplace and to figure out how the cathedral community would view using the property for that purpose. And so a major focus of our committee over the last 18 months has been to consider that possibility. And we have, as has been mentioned, issued a final report with our recommendations, issued it last month to the vestry. And you could go to the next slide. And I might just say a few more words about the process that we went through. Working with Meriwether, we put together a request for indications of interest by the developer community. We circulated that to over 7,000 developers nationwide. We ended up getting initial expressions of interest from roughly 35 developers. Came down to 3 developers who got more serious about responding to our expression of interest. We found one of those 3 developers to be a good cultural fit with us. And so we ended up focusing on that developer and evaluating the possibilities. And we ended up giving that developer a 120-day period to do due diligence with the notion that that due diligence wasn't going to obligate us in any way. And no matter what, it was going to provide useful information to us about the challenges of the St. Nicholas property, because that's what the developer was most concerned about, what was going to happen with the seismic issue and the roof and the like. So, so that developer did that work and also expressed a valuation of the property, which was subject to possibilities of an increase this way or that. The minimum statement of value that that developer came forward with was $8 million. So that was the kind of the specific number we were pondering as we went through our evaluation. We met with the developer and ultimately decided, and this was in June of last year, we met with the developer and we basically tentatively concluded that we were not interested in going forward with market rate housing, but we wanted to put that developer on hold while we looked at a couple of other alternatives. And so we expressly identified 2 alternative opportunities. One was affordable housing, and the other was just long-term use of the St. Nicholas building by St. Mark's for its own missional purposes. So just direct use of the building by the cathedral and or the building and the property. And so we put the developer on hold while we considered those issues. And then last month, we came forward with a final recommendation that we should not pursue market rate housing. So not only were we rejecting his tentative offer, if you will, I mean, it was earlier than offer stage, but anyway, we rejected his proposal, even though we still thought he was a good culture fit. But also more generally, we concluded as a committee that it did not make sense to pursue market rate kind of high-end condominium and townhome use. But we just felt that it was not congruent with the mission and ministry of St. Mark's. And it was a thoughtful decision that we made, because even though $8 million was less than Meriwether advisors had thought we might get from a market perspective, it was $8 million. And it also was going to have that developer taking over the seismic and other challenges of the building. And so, you know, it wasn't an insignificant offer by that developer, but we felt ultimately strongly that it just was incongruent with our mission and that there were other things that we should explore instead of market rate housing. Ultimately, kind of that led to our, as we looked at those alternatives, our kind of second conclusion was that that we needed to make every effort we could to directly use St. Nicholas for mission-related purposes, that needed to be our long-term objective. And that the best way to do that at this point in time was to continue the leases to Amistad and to Gage, or a successor to Gage, through July of 2031. Both those school uses are more related to our mission than market rate housing, but also they provide a good financial return for the next 10 years that Maria Coldwell will be talking about here in a couple of minutes. The challenges of the building aren't going to go away magically in the next 10 years. They're going to continue, but we feel there are significant benefits to delaying the decision on what we're going to do with the building and waiting until 2031 to take a next step is valuable to us. So next slide, if you would. One mantra that our committee kept repeating to itself, and I don't have the terminology down just right, but it was essentially that we are in control of the timing of what to do with St. Nicholas, but we're not under any pressure or emergency that requires us to do something to kind of save the situation in the near term. So we are free, if we want, to take advantage of postponing development of St. Nicholas. And there are some, we think, not insignificant benefits to delaying. One thing that happened during the course of our committee's work is that Brightwater left its lease situation and Amistad took its place. And we were able to negotiate a new lease with Amistad that continued until 2031, whereas Brightwater expired in 2023. We also negotiated a early termination right. So St. Mark's can terminate the Amistad lease on 18 months notice. But so we extended the lease term and negotiated a higher rent and a greater sharing of expenses by Amistad. So that changed some of the dynamics, and it made it one of the benefits of extending or postponing development until 2031 is that we get the benefit of that Amistad lease. And we hope with the Gage lease, Gage's lease still expires in 2023, but we think that either Gage will extend or we'll be able to find another tenant. There's a lot of interest in educational use. But there are some other advantages to delay as well. One that Steve is going to touch on later is that we don't really know yet what the post-COVID or new reality of COVID situation is going to be. And we suspect that it has an effect on use of cathedral facilities going forward. And we want to have some experience with that before deciding what a parish life and ministry center would look like. And so that's another benefit of delay or postponement. And then another benefit is to better move on the seismic retrofitting issue at a time when the city of Seattle is really moving forward with requiring seismic retrofitting. And we think that's going to be about 10 years from now. And one benefit of waiting until then is that there's going to be more expertise as the seismic retrofitting starts to happen. And we think there probably will be some funding programs available just because of the major financial challenge a lot of people are going to face in trying to deal with that seismic retrofitting. So long story short, we think there are some benefits to postponing. With that, I'll ask Maria Caldwell to come up and say a bit more about the financial modeling I was mentioning. Maria was a great member of our committee for two reasons. One is she shared the development of the 2030 plan, and I kept finding myself going back and consulting the 2030 plan as we were dealing with things as a committee, just because it did such a good job of assessing the situation for the cathedral between now and 2030. And then Maria also did great minutes at incredibly quickly. And because she did them so quickly and so well, she led us to think that we were rational and articulate and thoughtful in our deliberations. Maria.
Hi, I've been asked to go over the financial modeling for the St. Nicholas building over roughly the next 10 years, the revenues and expenses that we project, assuming that we continue to rent the building to tenants over that period. In truth, Jim Pinnell and then Steve Thomason worked on the spreadsheets that underlie these projections, so I'm really just reporting on their excellent work, which was reviewed by our committee and accepted. It's important to remember that these are just projections based on the current leases and our projected expenses over the next 10 years. As John mentioned, the Amistad School has signed a lease that runs through the middle of 2031. Whereas the Gage Academy's current lease expires in 2023. But we are hoping to negotiate a new lease with Gage. And if for any reason that doesn't work out, we hope to find a good successor tenant for the Gage wing of the building and sign a lease with them through the middle of 2031 to go along with the Amistad lease. So we project rental revenue from Amistad and Gage from the period 2022 through 2031 of $9 million, $227,893. And that includes some cost sharing, especially of utilities. During that period, we project that St. Mark's Cathedral's expenses for the St. Nicholas building will just be a little over $4 million, $4,020,135. And that includes a new roof costing about 1.1 million. The new roof is scheduled to be installed either this summer, 2022, or possibly next summer, 2023. And because it's going to cost over $1 million, it will require that we take a loan from Banner Bank, which will be repaid from the rental revenues from the leases over a short-term period of a few years. So our net over the period from 2022 to 2031 is projected to be over $5 million. $5,207,758, which we hope will be more than enough to pay for the seismic upgrades that are mandated by the city. The city of Seattle has not yet adopted new seismic standards for URM, that's unreinforced masonry buildings, which is what St. Nicholas is. But it's expected that the city council will adopt them in the next few years and then give owners of such buildings several years to make the upgrades. There may be special funding available once the standards have been adopted, government grants or loans to help owners make the upgrades. St. Mark's did do significant seismic work on the St. Nicholas building when we first acquired it from Cornish back in 2003. But the new standards are going to require a lot more work. But we are projecting a positive cash flow from the building over the next several years, and we should have enough money to make all of the necessary repairs to the structure while retaining ownership of this important asset. Thanks.
I forgot to mention one thing before I call up Emily, and that's the committee did, as I mentioned before, consider affordable housing as an option. And we considered affordable housing both on the St. Nicholas property and then possibly on the south parking lot. With respect to the St. Nicholas property, it wasn't, we couldn't pursue affordable housing for the next 10 years if we're going to continue the lease to Amistad, because the lease to Amistad covers enough property that you just can't place affordable housing. So affordable housing is still a possibility long-term on the St. Nicholas campus. That's a post 2031 issue. With respect to affordable housing on the south parking lot, our committee, this is an area in where we actually had disagreement within the committee. We did not reach a consensus other than the consensus that it was beyond our charter to consider affordable housing on the south parking lot, because we were only supposed to be considering the St. Nicholas property. So we, as we reported in our final report to the vestry, we included some discussion of affordable housing, but basically said, vestry, you need to decide whether this is something to explore. So, so we gave this final report to the vestry in February, and Emily, as her first act as senior warden, received the report. And so what has the vestry done with our report? Emily Meeks.
Thanks, John. So in February at the vestry retreat, we approved these core recommendations. And I think it's worth noting that so many of the projects and initiatives that we work on, this is certainly one that interconnects our mutual ministry goals of creation care, restorative justice, and intergenerational. I think of all the different ways that these decisions have hit those goals and the ways that we've made considerations, that it's really been an exceptional initiative to be able to connect those. We may be pausing long-term development of St. Nicholas, but there will continue to be many moving parts that will require consideration and collaboration. I'm not sure there's a vestry meeting that I personally can remember where John has not been either part of the agenda or on the agenda. I think I actually thought he was an ad hoc member for a little bit when I first started. And so we are really grateful for his expertise, but also we benefit from the continued knowledge and expertise from Steve and Walter and Clara and Ree, having had Phil and now Lynn as part of the work from the committee, and their continued lens on this work will be really helpful as we make important decisions about the roof and about things that continue to happen in St. Nicholas. We anticipate that there will be renewed long-term planning efforts, and Walter will touch on some of these initiatives post 2030 that will require planning well in advance of 2031. And so you'll certainly be hearing more of St. Nicholas. We certainly will be talking about it continually in vestry. But I think that this is an example tonight of our continued commitment for transparency and the work that we are doing to make sure that we are being good stewards of this property and ensuring your input. Thank you.
Next slide. We thought it would be good to spend a little time this evening talking about some strategic visioning beyond 2030. And there's nobody better to talk about this than Walter Studeville. He both was a committee member and also a junior warden on the vestry, and has focused on facilities related issues for, now I think it's fair to say, many years at St. Mark's. And Walter, tell us about strategic visioning.
That was a kind way of saying I'm old. And it's true. So the Cathedral Parish has been doing strategic visioning on a fairly regular basis in the past. So this is, our recommendations about that are really nothing new. I think we need to continue the kind of process we did before, and we have a model that we know works. The last one that I am thinking of right now was led by Maria, and that has, as John said, has been a real focus of this committee. Also, as John said, mission and ministry focus was a guide for the committee throughout our process. And though our charge was to talk about the St. Nicholas property, we obviously had to talk about the Cathedral campus as a whole, since one part of it affects the rest of it. And so it did have an effect all the way across. As the slide says, the missional use could include both parish focused and benefits for the broader community. And we did spend some time talking about that. And as the bullet points at the end talk about, sharing space with the diocese is one idea. Another idea is space for nonprofit arts groups who are struggling right now in our very expensive city to find space where they can operate from. And this might be part of what we could do with the St. Nicholas property. The possibilities of the various kinds of community and parish related engagements are not limited to those bullet points. But just let me say one thing about what John just mentioned, affordable housing, because the committee spent a great deal of time with that, probably more time on that issue than any other. And we were assisted by Rebecca Ralston, a member of the committee, who is, I'm not sure what her official title is, but her company does build affordable housing and she knows a great deal about it. She actually, at our request, went through the financing for affordable housing twice, and I'm still not sure I quite understand it. It's very complicated. The other interesting meeting we did about affordable housing was as we met with the rector and one of the parish members at St. Luke's Ballard, who were just in the beginning process of using the property in Ballard to build 2 towers for affordable housing. And they walked us through the process that they've gone through, and they're planning on just tearing down the entire complex that is on the site now and rebuilding it from scratch. But it was fascinating to learn what that process is, and it's clearly a process, if we're going to go forward with that, that is going to take us a long time to develop all the parts of it and move forward with that. So I think what the committee is trying to say is that we see St. Nicholas as a very valuable property, as a historical landmark that we appreciate, and as a real asset. And we don't want to be hasty to figure out what can we do with it beyond functioning as a school. And right now that's very successful. So I'll be looking forward to see what the strategic visioning for 2030 comes up with. God willing, I'm still around.
So as I mentioned, when we acquired St. Nicholas in 2003, a goal was to use the building as a parish life and ministry center. And so Steve, who's given some thought and kind of led our committee's considerations regarding Parish Life and Ministry Center, is going to chat on that subject with us.
Well, if pandemic has taught me anything, it's that whatever I knew was certain before is no longer certain, right? There is at the same time this wonderful, exciting idea to consider what a new and fresh and a well thought out Parish Life Ministry Center would look like on our campus, how it might offer synergies not only for ministries of St. Mark's, but for the broader community, as Walter just identified some of the potential ways for that to happen, how it would consolidate and integrate our campus with current buildings and with the potential for additional buildings. But as we began this work in 2020, and as the pandemic wore on, what became more and more apparent to me is that we're not entirely sure what church is going to look like in 2022, in 2025, or in 2030 even. We know it's going to be different than what we had thought about 5 years ago, and it might be different 5 years from now than what we think it is now. And so even as the committee began to dream about what are those prospective locations and ways to synergize on the campus for a Parish Life Center, and the three most logical places that we mentioned were in place of the Gage wing, which is the southernmost and western wing, which you can see highlighted there on the graph on the side on the slide, or on the south parking lot on the easterly part, so on the upper part of the south parking lot, or potentially within the historic part of the St. Nicholas building that faces 10th Avenue East. I don't think that we're in a place where it would be good stewardship to try to create a case statement for a major capital campaign to build a Parish Life Center on any of those at this point. I think we have to live the question about what it looks like. I mean, here we are, we've got 45 people gathered here for this event, but only about a dozen here in the space, and thankfully another 33 online. But what does that mean for the spaces that we need on campus? And how does it mean that we're going to continue to forge community beyond our worship spaces? And so my proposal to the committee, and they graciously seemed to arrive at the same point, which was that we don't need to be in a hurry of developing and building a case to build a new Parish Life Center. We can live that question for a time, come on through the pandemic, figure out what our financial picture, what our membership picture, and what the nature of being church in this coming decade it looks like. And so parallel with holding tight with our current setup with the subtenants in the St. Nicholas property, we want to also hold on the Parish Life Center. But we'd be delighted to have conversation here in just a few minutes as we turn to questions and answers. John, do I turn it back to you, or is it time for Q&A? All right. So why don't we, everyone, if you need to speak in the room, you're going to need to speak in the microphone, or the folks at home can't hear you. So we've got two mics. I'm going to hand this one to Walter and Emily for this end. And you on Zoom, if you have a question, you can either raise your hand and I'll call on you, or if I'm not able to catch that, just feel free to unmute and state your question. Okay. Any questions here in the room, or comments to make either, I should say? Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Hi, I'd just like to ask a couple really simple numbers questions. I think they're probably answers you maybe already have. And one of them is, what's the percent of the building that's occupied by the two tenants now? Is it fully occupied? Is it 50%? Is that a number anybody knows, or is that a get back to me later?
The two schools occupy about 80% and we occupy just under 20%. A part of that is shared usage, but
Sure.
and let me also say in relation to that, Maria's figures, which she addressed drawing off of a big spreadsheet that was developed to try to look at this, does not account for unknown deferred maintenance challenges on a 100-year-old building. We know that they are there. We don't know when they're going to rear their ugly head. We just spent about $165,000 on a settlement of the foundation off of a stairwell. Those things are going to continue to crop up. If it's 50 here, 75 there, it's all built into that formula, that spreadsheet. But if it's a $500,000 here and a $500,000 there, that's a game changer. And we just have to be aware that that's a risk with the 100-year-old building with a lot of deferred maintenance on it.
Sure. A couple other simple questions, I think. How big is the building itself? How many square feet is the building?
Roughly 42,000.
42,000. And how big is the lot? Right, roughly. I'm not asking, I'm just trying to get a sense of scale.
Just over 42,000.
Divided by 3, right? It's okay. If that's not a handy number, that's fine.
I can get it for you, Steve.
I'm really interested because those scale questions are what I think help guide me in thinking about this project. So just two other quick questions. Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, one thing to be aware of is that the property has environmentally critical area as a part of it, and also it's currently historically landmarked, and so there are limitations on what can be done with the undeveloped part of the property.
So that was my other question is, what is the zoning on the property? Is it?
So the zoning is single-family residence.
Sorry, single zoning on that. So it's single-family residence.
Single-family residence. Institutional use is allowed within a single-family residence on a conditional use basis, and so that's the basis on which we are able to have a church on that single-family residential property. And the building is and site are currently historically landmarked. That doesn't restrict what the church can do with the property if it's used for church-related purposes. There are state Supreme Court decisions that state.
So is demolition of the whole property down, raising the property, is that an option at all, or is it protected by those historical limits?
If St. Mark's uses the building for its own purposes, demolition would be a possibility, not one that we would eagerly pursue, but given the challenges that I described with the building, it's not off the table when we're relooking at this in the future.
Certainly. The neighborhood and environmentally critical areas make it a challenging development site. So anyway, thank you very much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
The 109,000 square feet is the property.
Okay, 109,720 square foot site. Other speeches here in the, or not, I don't mean that was a speech, that was great. Does anyone else have something they'd like to state or question? Yes.
Well, you're going to have to, here, I'll take it to him. You go, Tony.
One thing is there we are. One thing, it's a brick building, and tuck pointing on a 100-year-old building is something that comes up. Have you looked into that at all?
Maria, you want to?
Well, there's actually a fairly thin brick veneer that covers the outside of the building. And that's, part of the seismic worry is that if we had a really major quake, a lot of that would simply crumble and fall off. But some of the seismic upgrades that will be required are more the attachment of the upper part of the building to the foundation, how they suggest that you do that in your own home, for instance. If it's not directly connected, that's a problem. And that is the situation with the St. Nicholas building. So that's some of the work that we're looking at. We're not exactly sure what the new regulations will be for unreinforced masonry buildings. So it's hard to make a ballpark estimate of how much it's going to cost when you don't even know exactly what's going to be required, but it will be substantial work.
Well, the question on was about, we can't hear you. The question on tuck pointing is the mortar itself. That's with time will start to turn to sand. And it is very incredibly expensive to tuck point a large building like that. That was the question. Is that something that you've looked into, and what is the integrity of the grout itself? And if you haven't looked at it, that's okay.
The tuck pointing is fairly sound still, although there are settlement fissures that have happened in various parts of the building that we're monitoring, but the mortar itself is okay. The big challenge, though, as Maria mentioned, is that this is ornamental brick with a lot of specialty inlays. And so any sort of reinforcing of the masonry is a very elaborate project. Yeah.
I guess the other thing I would just mention in passing is that if St. Nicholas property was going to be used for market rate housing, the approach was going to be to take advantage of the historic status of the building, and to do that, the work needed to be done within the confines of the existing buildings, or at least the historic building needed to be preserved rather than knocked down or materially changed. And so the developer who did the 120 days of due diligence looked very hard at the building to make sure that he wasn't going to be taking on unanticipated expenses. So while we're not tuck pointing experts, I think the developer, I'm sure, considered that in his assessment of the building. Looks like we have I can't see that far, but.
Is there anyone else?
No, I know, but it looked like somebody. Okay, so are there questions or comments from Zoom? Oh, there I can see. Okay, Wayne.
Yeah, so I was wondering if the committee had any communication with the Partners for Sacred Places nonprofit in Philadelphia during the 18 months of your fine work. They specialize in working with churches with old buildings and trying to find ways of using them creatively and effectively. So I was just wondering if you'd had contact with them.
We didn't, but we were aware of the possibility of working with them, and it's a good suggestion going forward. I mean, it wouldn't have been directly relevant to the particular project we were evaluating, but in terms of our use of the property, it's a very good point, and we've got time to pursue it.
Okay, thank you.
Other Zoom comments or questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Kathy?
What is the status of the current loan that we have out on the last building project? I believe it's also with Banner Bank.
Yes, so let's clarify, there is no longer a mortgage on the St. Nicholas property. We paid that off in 2020, along with the gift from the LLC partner, Bob and Laura Ellen Mulia, their family trust. But when we did the Livingstones project on the cathedral itself with the windows, the elevator, and the mason, the stonework, to finish that project, we borrowed $1 million and we've paid just under 500,000 back. So we owe about 530,000 on that note. And we make monthly payments on it as we whittle it down.
Thank you.
Steve Moen?
Yeah, what are the rights or controls of this property as you look to the west of the property?
It's very similar to the situation that we're familiar with here on the main campus. Cornish also contributed or sold their greenbelt rights to the city in exchange for some funds. And so the situation on the Cornish or on the St. Nicholas property is the same as on our main campus. Please follow up if that wasn't responsive.
Well, maybe you could describe just for both properties, the existing, what do we have a permanent lookout to the west that can never be interfered with?
I think the practical answer is yes, because the property is owned by the city now, subject to an easement that is to protect it as a greenbelt.
Greenbelt protection then
Right.
is key, right? Thank you.
Mhm.
Although I do want to say, as the trees continue to grow in height, there is a restriction on any kind of trimming of those. And so just even in my time here, the views, Steve, are not exactly unhindered, but they are naturally hindered, which I think is the design and intent of a green belt anyway. We do know, though, from not our own experience, but from others, that if you go and you mess with trimming trees to get you a better view, the city does not look kindly on that.
That's right. If you walk away tonight with one thing to know, don't trim the trees. Other questions or comments from the Zoom crowd? Does anybody want to make the case? John Selberg.
I just wanted to thank you all for the outstanding work that you have done. I don't think that we can't ever replace that property if we sold it. And so we have a lot of potential there. So I think you all deserve great gratitude. So thank you.
We were thinking of trading it for the property that's behind you, but anyone else? Lynn Markova.
I really just wanted to say thank you for the update and thank you I think that this result is really good. I mean, compared to when I was on the vestry, this has been an issue for years and the end result is far better than I would have imagined from our deliberations back then. And so I think the thoughtful approach and really mindful way of exploring all the options was really, really impressive. And also it was fun to revisit this with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thanks. That was such a positive comment. I don't know if anybody's going to want to make a negative comment.
Please feel free.
So, okay, well, we're going to have a couple of very brief closing comments, one of which, probably the most important of which, is that as we go forward, there are going to be other opportunities for input. I know the vestry is committed to continuing to have a transparent process, and we very much welcome whatever input or thoughts you may have as we move forward. So don't feel like this was your only opportunity tonight to offer comments. And I would say personally, I'm still quite excited about where we're going to end up, not only during the next 10 years, but after the next 10 years. The St. Nicholas property remains a really wonderful opportunity for us. And to the extent that we can use it to advance directly the cathedral's mission and ministries, that would be wonderful. And to the extent that we can advance both parish-related mission and community-oriented mission, that also would be wonderful. And I think there are going to be those opportunities. Steve, you also get to make a final comment.
Well, just to echo the expression of gratitude that some of you have made tonight. I just have this delight and sense of deep gratitude for the faithfulness of this committee, the others that aren't here tonight, but were such a remarkable part of the work. I want to acknowledge Ree Knack, our chancellor, and her good work in navigating with this, and Phil Lloyd, just finished his term as treasurer, and Lynn Cobb joined in just at the last minute as the new treasurer, and the ways that they have continued to provide insight and wisdom. And then Jerry Johnson, a member of St. Mark's, who served as an advisor, and John had him and the others on his list earlier, but I just wanted to highlight their expertise and the ways that they've contributed. And Rebecca Ralston, member of the committee, and her great gift of wisdom in the ways that she brought that to bear in affordable housing conversations. So as we said at the beginning, we have a sense of conclusion of this work for this particular time, but it is not a finishing of the work altogether. This is cathedrals, as it's often said, are never finished in the great tradition of cathedrals. And the work of the development of this cathedral campus is not yet finished either. And so with that in mind, why don't we close with a prayer in which we ask God's blessings on our continued work then, shall we? Let us pray. Oh, gracious God, it is with a sense of your presence and your calling us into this good work that we know that you continue to have greater things in store for us than we could ever ask for or imagine. We ask your blessings upon us and upon this cathedral community and all whom we serve in your name in and from this place. For those who use this campus day by day, the community groups, the schools, the arts and music ministries, the nonprofits of justice work, and so many others, even as a urban haven in the midst of the city. As we go our separate ways tonight, may we go with a sense of your peace, which passes all understanding. And may we be ever mindful of the needs of others who may go hungry or homeless this night. And for all those caught in the realms of war, may we be mindful of them on our hearts as well. We ask it all in your holy name. Amen. Good night, everyone.